Millions of children are educated every day in a myriad of settings. Homeschool, public school, private school, charter schools, online academies, learning pods, private tutoring, and more. Why are so many families transitioning to homeschooling? What advantages have they found? What unique challenges do they face? What have they learned, and how can listening to their experiences support your child's education? These are their stories. Together, we learn. This is The Edvantage. Hello, fellow educators, and thank you for listening. I'm Todd Michael, creator and host of The Edvantage. Today's guest is Leah McDermott. Leah is a former master teacher turned unschooling advocate and mother of three. After over a decade spent in the world of education, 2 Masters of Education degrees, and multiple teaching certifications, Leah slowly began to realize that the way we were teaching our children in public schools went against everything that we knew to be true about learning acquisition and child development. When she gave birth to her first son in 2011, she knew it was time to make a change, and she left the classroom to be home with her child. Her passion for helping other children and families didn't disappear, however, so as her son got older and closer to school age, she was determined to lean into trusting him as a learner and support other families in doing the same with their children. Through developing a child-led learning curriculum, creating a supportive space online for parents, and most recently, opening Bridge Academy, a private umbrella school for unschoolers, Leah continues her life's work of encouraging adults to unlearn what they've always believed to be true as they lean fully into trusting their children as natural, capable learners. Outside of work, Leah and her family are passionate about traveling the world and learning about new things together. Leah joined us from her home in Pennsylvania, where she lives with her husband, Brian, their 3 boys, and a revolving myriad of pets. I hope you enjoy the interview. Well, Leah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome to The Edvantage.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I'm so excited to dig into unschooling and get a lot of the answers. I think so many homeschoolers and just onlookers misunderstand about unschooling. But before we get into that, I would love to hear a little bit about your background, your education, because a lot of times, we arrive at where we're at a lot of times, and it's informed by where we came from, and our interaction with our education, as you well know, influences so much about our perspectives. And so you have such a great grasp on the reality of unschooling, the reality of homeschooling, but I would love to hear a little bit about how you got there, where your education started and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. The journey informs so much about who we are and who we become. And it's something that as parents, it's so important for us to do, even if we're not going to homeschool, even if, we don't think that we had any issues with our schooling.
Right.
It's just like with anything in parenting, right? If you don't confront some of those things that happened in your childhood, your children will push those buttons and make sure that you confront them. And education is no different. So it's really funny that you're asking this question now. Just the other day, I was talking, one of my best friends, her children are in public school. Mm-hmm. And she was telling me about just some awful things that are going on with one of her children, and how the situation is happening with him in school. And I was giving advice a little bit and talking about it. And she said, it's so funny having been your friend for so many years and watching your journey and the advice that you give. And she's like, I think that you're a full-on educational anarchist now. Like, man, I wish that it wasn't so polarizing to put that in my tagline, like Leah McDermott, educational anarchist.
Right.
But, looking back over, almost 40 years of learning and journeying and being in this space, I guess it's appropriate. So my history, I began in public school like most of us. My family moved a lot in the military. So in 4th grade, my parents made the choice to homeschool me because we were just moving all of the time. It made more sense. But it was still new then. It was still illegal in a lot of places in the United States.
Sure.
So while I was a homeschooled child, it was extremely rigid type homeschooling. So we kept school hours. We had a school classroom in our house. We did textbooks and assessments and standardized tests and red pens and all of the, you know, just in a different space, but very, very rigid homeschooling. And then I went to teacher school. I got multiple certifications as a teacher, 2 master's degrees in education, one as a reading specialist, one in curriculum and instruction design. I spent several years teaching in public school classrooms, both in rural communities, inner city communities. And then I got pregnant with my first child, who will be 11 next month.
Okay.
And something shifts then, you know, just like when you become a parent, something starts to change and you start realizing, hold on, something's not right here. And I started noticing the biggest shift for me, I think, other than having my own child in being in the classroom, was I began my professional career in a kindergarten classroom. And so they're coming in and they're joyful and they're excited to learn and they have a million questions and everything is magical and they want to know everything about the world. And then I was transitioned to a 5th grade classroom. The district did some redistricting and moved me around. And all of a sudden, they all hated being there. Nobody wanted to be there. No one wanted to read. No one wanted to write. No one wanted to do projects. Like we killed it. We killed their love of learning in 4 years. And I was like, what did we do? What happened? And I something wasn't setting right. And so I started really digging into research. And that's when I was going through some of my master's degrees. And then I saw some more disparities, like, okay, I'm over here studying everything we know about the brain and the way children learn and the way we process information. But what we're doing in the classroom is exactly the opposite of everything that we know to be true about how people learn and how motivation plays in and interest plays into things. And so it all just started, not making sense. And then when I got pregnant with my oldest, I was like, okay, I definitely don't want my child in this system. So I will homeschool, but I also have to figure out what's going on here. And, the rest is just me in this bubble of research and developing products and spaces for homeschooling parents that just eventually became, the world of unschooling and child-led learning, and has brought me to where I am today, just fully embracing, trusting our children and letting them guide their learning journey, because I really believe that's how we change the world.
That is so awesome. I love your story. And I was grinning the whole time you were talking because, and I don't think you knew this, and I didn't know these details about you. So this is great to discover this right now. We have such similar stories. So same type of thing. I was homeschooled, and then I got my, teaching certificate, got a master's degree, went into the classroom. My first job was kindergarten. And my second year, they had an opening in upper grades. They needed to shift me. So I got transitioned to a 5-6 combo, and same exact thing. Like, exactly. I totally get it. Cause it's like, I was in a very overcrowded school district, and this was a time when, budget was impacted and all these things. So I had 34 kids in my kindergarten classroom, no aid. Only 4 of them spoke English. I had 9 4-year-olds at the start of the year. I mean, these were just little kids, and there were a billion of them.
Yes.
And yet, like, we were singing songs together and reading stories and counting, and like they were learning through art and coloring. And I had my mom come in and do art projects with them. And like, we got so much done, but a lot of it was because I was going rogue. And just as you say, I was following the training I had received in my graduate program, even though that wasn't what the district wanted me to do. Like, the district literally had adopted curriculum where me and all of my colleagues were supposed to be on the same page every day of the curriculum. And I was like, okay, this is cool. I'll spend 15 minutes on this. And then the rest of the time, here's what we're going to do. And so similar observations, just as you, it's like, there are the best practices. There's the pedagogy that does make sense because it's research-based. It's based off of brain development and their social emotional needs and all of these great things. But when you get into the classroom, you see a bastardized version of that they still attach the labels, but in so many cases, the actual substance is stripped out, and it's in 10 times out of 10, it's because of management needs, because, there's so many kids and there's so little time, and there's this requirement and that requirement and this law. And so it's all just a compliance. So I love that you highlight that. And again, and I'm always clear to say it, and I know you have this soft spot as well. It's not, I'm anti-teacher or I'm anti-classroom. I would love it if more public schools embrace this. I would love it if public school classrooms were transformed to be child-led. It's just right now, homeschooling is the only place where you can get that autonomy. And so, that's where I chose to put my weight and my time. And I resigned last year, but thank you for sharing that. That got me so excited. So awesome. You mentioned here you are creating all of these materials, creating spaces and all of this. I'm curious for you, what has been the most challenging, I guess the best word is myth, but like, what are some of the more challenging hurdles to help parents through when they're unfamiliar with unschooling and you're trying to help them see the value of it? Because, there are all the classic stereotypes about homeschooling. And then it's like unschooling is the redheaded stepchild, even within the homeschooling community. Like, oh, well, I'm not, like the misunderstanding is like, well, I'm not going off the rails. I'm not letting my kids do whatever they want or whatever. There's these things that people assume. And so I imagine you have so much of that to kind of help parents through before you can even then start unlocking. And here's what it actually is, here's what it isn't.
Yeah.
Process that. Now here's what it is. So what are some of those myths?
Yeah, I think you hit a couple there. The work that I end up doing, parents always come to me and it feels like it's a problem with the child, and it is 10 times out of 10, it is a problem with the parent. It's either, it's either the
expectations.
It's an expectation issue. It's an engagement issue. It's a simple, like, you are teaching the way you learn best, and that's not how your child learns best. So just like, butting heads that way. But it's, it all comes down to parents having to do their own deschooling work. And like, you can wrap it up in so many things, just capitalism in general, like why do you feel like your kids have to be doing things at a certain, like what is wasting time, right? I have a lot of parents that tell me, well, if I let them do whatever they want, they just waste time. Well, they're 9. Like, well, how can a 9-year-old waste time, right? Like, even me, how am I wasting time if I'm, doing what I want to do during the day? But yeah, I think, some of the biggest myths with unschooling are that there's no structure, there's no routine. Just this, kids do whatever they want all day long, and there's no structure, there's no control. Too much screens, all of these very like anti-classroom, or these just a vision of what childhood looks like now, that it's quote unquote learning these important things that are supposed to make them successful adults. And that's their only responsibility as a parent. And I think we have to really undo some of that work of like, what should childhood look like? Let's understand what, and this too, like the public education system as we know it today is not even that old. It's only, 50, 60 years that we've been doing it. Like before that, it did look like children embracing what they were good at and working with mentors and, trade schools and learning things that they had an interest in. But yeah, I think the biggest myth, I'm talking in circles, the biggest myth is, what kids do all day in an unschooled home. And again, it is like the parents needing to strip away like what that has to look like, so my kids, they are, we spend our days following their interests, doing the things that they love. We go out of the house, spend a lot of time in nature. We take a lot of trips. They, communicate with people online that live all over the world. They game, they cook for themselves. They help with their baby brother, take care of their pets. Like they are effectively living life just like they will as adults, following their passions, solving problems, learning how to ask for help or find an answer to something that they need, teaching them skills for living versus filling their head with information that they probably don't care about, that won't do anything for them later on. So
Right.
I think it's, and a lot of it is, how do I do that? Like I think when a lot of parents who are totally even new to homeschooling, they think it's this undertaking, this task, like
Right.
planning and preparing and buying all of these things, when it's really, you've already been doing it. Your baby learned how to walk, they learned how to talk, they learned how to ride a bike, and that's how learning happens. That's what happens in our brain. We figure things out when we need that information. And it's just, unschooling is really just a continuance of the way that you've been living your lives with your kids. So there's a lot of undoing there for sure.
Yeah, a lot of assumptions to be challenged for sure. I think it's interesting. You make a great point of these early years. We can all accept that our kids will learn to walk without having to have a structured walking program that we follow, and a rigid walking practice schedule, and walking deadlines, and a scope and sequence for crawling to walking transition. I mean, some of that stuff that we are fine with in other learning, it would sound ludicrous to apply it to these early learning experiences. And yet when you evaluate it and take a step back, well, what is it that a baby is doing to walk? Well, for one thing, they're not being told 1,000 other things to do. They're given time to crawl and move around and stand and fall and hold on and walk a step and fall. And so, yeah, it's the time. That is exactly what it is. It's giving those precious moments to our kids each day. And, another layer of it that I see a lot of is teachers who know better and parents who know better really feel pressured by, well, what does this look like? And this is something you speak to a lot in your social media posts. And I know it's near and dear to you, but, we feel this pull to prove or show others how valid our efforts are. And the most common way to do that is through assessment or through grades or through these kind of objective measures that we can point to and say, look, compared to 5,000 other kids, here's where my kid ranks. Or compared to this test that this PhD created that must be valid because it was created, here's how my kid measures up. And so what do you say to the parent who, says, hey, that sounds great. That, the life you just described that your kids have, all that sounds great. I would love for my kid to have that freedom, but I don't want them to fall behind. I don't want them to miss out on opportunities and not be able to get into a good college. And, the list goes on. If they don't have, records to show for it, if, what if they're grandparents, what will they think? Right. What do you say to the parent who's so concerned and focused on that?
Yeah. Again, it ends up, the journey of that question ends up back at, how do you feel about assessment? Like, how did it feel as a test? But really, the first thing is with standardized tests specifically, like, it's very important that we understand what those were designed for, aside from, lobbying and sales of those things to begin with.
Sure.
Like, a standardized test is not designed to measure one child's performance. It tells you nothing. And this as a teacher who's seen those results. When I was teaching in 5th grade, we didn't even get the test scores from our kids until they were in the next grade. So
exactly.
That, I have a new group of 35 kids and I have the test scores from last year. So they are not even designed to tell you information about one child. Those are designed for massive, large scale data, like country versus country, state versus state, school district versus school district. That's the lowest level that it will tell you information is within a school district. So to have placed this false idea of this test, this one big standardized test telling you something about a child's performance, it is extremely false, because that's not even what it was designed for. It was also designed to reach a point of failure. So these standardized tests are not, okay, here's everything that a 5th grader should know. Let's give them this test and see what they know. For a 5th grader, the information on that test, the questions are going to be everything from 1st grade to 12th grade. So it is designed for a person who is taking it to reach a point of failure. And A child cannot understand that. They feel the failure when they get to a question that they don't know.
So
They don't know that
deeply.
that's, yeah, they don't know that that's designed for them to not know it, that it is okay, that they don't know that is beyond their scope of understanding intentionally. It feels like failure. It is internalized failure. It would be like I said, me saying, I'm interested in how, I'd like to learn how to change the oil in my car. And then a mechanic giving me, 100-question test about all of the workings of a car. Well, I'm not going to know it, and I'm going to feel like a failure.
Right.
And I'm probably not going to want to keep following that interest of working on my own car. Never mind. I don't know any of it. I guess it's beyond what I could ever do. So, it's very important to understand what those tests and assessments are actually for and what they do to the person that's taking them. And that's, that's the average child, let alone the child who has performance anxiety or is a perfectionist or, takes it very personally when they don't know something.
Sure.
Not to mention, when you take in, low income families or children who are hungry or in, tough home situations, like
didn't get sleep the night before. Yeah.
Exactly. Or having, breakup issues with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, it's just, there's so much that we don't take into consideration there. So, and then I always ask parents then to think about their lives now, everything that we do for our children as parents, as teachers, it is to prepare them for life without us, without that protection, without that safety net, without, living in your home. And so I asked them to think about that because you're living that now as an adult. So what does performance and assessment look like in your life now? How often are you assessed on your performance, really? Because there's very few jobs that are out there where you're like taking a test to prove that you're doing a good job, right?
Right.
And then when we look at the realities of work now and in the future, 80% of the jobs that are done now are going to be done by robots in 15 years. So what are we preparing them for? When we look at, the biggest employers in the country like Google and Facebook and these, tech companies, when we look at the skills that they're looking for, they're not looking for grades or, test performance. They're looking for people who have good communication skills, who are team players, who have new ideas, who are good problem solvers, things that aren't tested or taught. So it's just, there has to be some reality shifts. I think it's just the generation of parents where, we were part of that big experiment of standardized tests and No Child Left Behind and, preparing, that last generation really of like, yes, okay, if you do good job, you go to college, you get your good grades, you're going to get a good job. You're going to be okay. And it isn't the reality anymore. And yet we're still attaching that to our children because that's all we knew. That's all we know. And it's not realistic. And when you just sit and think about it for a little bit, you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe all of a sudden I don't care so much about some of the assessments, that my kids have, because it doesn't tell us anything about them. And and even with the pandemic, that changed everything even more. How, most colleges in the US were like, oh, we don't actually use SAT. Like SAT scores are meaningless. Why are we even, never mind. Like they don't even require them anymore. So like there is a shift, but you have to be willing to be a part of it or it's never going to change.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. My nephew just got into BYU, Idaho, and he was really stressed because he was homeschooled and he was stressed because he hasn't gotten his GED yet. And when he went to apply, he's like, well, I'm just going to apply and see what happens. It was like, oh yeah, we don't need GED or transcript. Like it was so much more relaxed than it's been in previous years. So he got in and he's thrilled because he's like, oh, sweet. I don't have to worry about that. I love the highlighting of what the actual test measures, because so much of what kind of standard or traditional educational settings instill is a stifling of divergent thinking. And so it's like, tell me the answer I'm looking for. Tell me what I just told you so I know you heard me say it. And it's very little of, here is an open-ended question. How would you answer it? Thank you for answering it, student number 342. How would you answer it, number 343? It's like, as soon as I get an answer that's the one I'm looking for, we move on. And so the lesson, you know, implicit and sometimes explicit in each day is you need to figure out what your teacher wants you to say and do it. And that's how you're labeled a good student. And if you're creative and you do something different than your peers, or you challenge an idea, I mean, how bold would you have to be to challenge the idea that your teacher just presented? That's when you get labeled a troublemaker. And so time and time again, I would see these brilliant children funneled into resource or funneled into, you know, they were still in the classroom, but they were getting this kind of negative stigma that would follow them from classroom to classroom. Well, that's a red dot student. There's on their card, we put a red dot on it. And that means that they're a troublemaker. You know, they're going to give you extra trouble. They're going to disrupt in class. But you spend 5 minutes with these kids one-on-one. So most recently I was working as an administrator. So I got this wonderful opportunity for 3 years to see classrooms without being it just be my classroom. And so you'd see these kids functioning in the classroom and with the way the teacher would expect them to behave. And it was, you know, butting heads. You would get that kid one-on-one and they would be telling you about the most interesting things. And they would be noticing their environment and 20 different things in their environment all simultaneously. And they would be asking you intelligent, well thought out questions about what you were speaking to them about. And so it wasn't an issue of they were, you know, had behavior issues or they had intelligence issues. It was that the divergent thinking had not died in them and they wouldn't let it die because it was too dang interesting. Yes. And so when you talk about these 21st century, you know, skills, it's like, yes, that's what the next, say what you will of Elon Musk, but like the next kind of creative tycoon of that nature will need. They're not going to need to fall in line and do what everyone else is doing because everyone who did what everyone else was doing is, following the same boring path. It is that divergent thinking that we have to keep alive.
And if you look, if you ask people, who do you look up to? Who do you view as successful in the world? It is either going to be people who followed their creative talents, like actors and athletes, or it is people who, just like you described, they maybe didn't do well in school in the traditional sense, or they flat out said, I was always in the principal's office. I was always in detention. I got D's and F's, and yet now they are, Fortune 500 owned companies, or they are, nonprofit. They started nonprofits, or they have genius ideas. Like, who are you raising, right? You're like, who do you look up to? What do you want for your child? And how are you going to help them get there? Because the mainstream, like everybody does the same thing. Everybody learns the same thing at exactly the same time. Like, it's not going to get them there without, handicapping them, really.
Right. And another layer that I think a lot of parents forget about is we're not operating in, and you mentioned this earlier, but we're not operating in the, college to job paradigm anymore. I mean, it is completely about, number one, first and foremost, like you said, your social skills, your people skills, your creativity, your problem solving. And then it's just like, hey, how quickly can you learn what it is we need you to do for this job? Like, we will train you. We will pay to train you. We will take you as you are. I mean, if I can't keep track of how many employers I've heard say, look, if someone could just show up and be sober and coherent and reliable, like, I'm fine to teach them everything they need to know about the job.
Exactly. A willingness to learn.
Right. Yep. So it's unfortunate that so many people are still in that trap, because it is not, well, if you didn't learn it before the age of 18, you have no chance of learning it. It's like, no, what you're learning is that you need to learn about yourself as a learner when you're a kid. And then when you're an adult, when you have different jobs, which, your job's probably going to change a few times, you'll learn that job when you need to, but do you have the ability to?
Right. Exactly. And I think that speaks to motivation, which is so important also to understand for those parents who are so worried, like, well, if I'm not forcing them to write 5-paragraph essays and do all these math problems. And they do want to go to college because they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a job that needs a college degree.
Sure.
How do I know they're going to be successful? You know, when I was in high school, I was forced to take algebra for several years and I hated it. I hated it so much and it didn't make sense to me and I didn't understand it and I didn't care. And so I got C's and D's because I didn't care. And then I went to college for the career that I was interested in and I had to take algebra, but I needed it then. So I had the motivation to figure it out. And I got an A in college algebra class because I needed that. And that we discount how important motivation is. And it is actually the most important factor in actually acquiring knowledge about something. When we look at the brain, you know, wanting to know something is how you learn it, not by being forced to regurgitate it. And so for the child who is at some point on that path of going to college, of taking those classes, of being successful, if they have the motivation to be that person, they can figure it out. It's like any other job. Anybody can write a 5-paragraph essay when they actually have to do it. It's not something that every 10-year-old needs to perfect. And what it's actually doing, and again, we have to look at that like cost and benefit. Are you teaching them at 5th grade how to write a 5-paragraph essay so that 10 years from now they could be successful in a college class?
Yeah.
What you're actually doing is making them feel like failures because they can't, or you're making them hate it so much that how many of them are you deterring from the path that they may have been on because you were forcing that skill before they were developmentally ready or interested.
And that's huge.
It's, and when you look at the research of like boys around ages 9 to 10 who say they hate writing, they hate reading. I'm bad at writing. I'm bad at reading. And it's huge. It's something like 88% of 4th grade boys will tell you they are bad writers or they hate writing. And we've done that. We did that to them. That's not something that they came to by themselves. And it's almost statistically impossible to change their minds because it's too late, you know, like they've formed those ideas about themselves at that age. And so it's critical that we change the way that we are approaching learning, because we act like you said, if they don't have the knowledge by 18, they can't ever acquire it. And like, so think about how much growth happened just in your physical body from 0 to 18, right? 5 to 18. I have a 1.5-year-old and his little chubby fingers, his bones aren't even fused yet, you know, he has like 90 more bones in his body than I do. And like the amount of physical growth, you know, my preteen is like gangly and falling all over because his feet are too big for his body. And but we still expect them like, no, you have to sit still for this many hours. These are the important things. Civil War facts. Ridiculous, you know, and all of the emotional things that happen and in puberty and relationships. Like if we would just look at no other time in our lives do all of those things happen to our bodies and our brains. And yet we're piling all of this useless knowledge on top of everything else that's happening. If we could just trust that they were capable, that they were able, that they would figure it out. It's just, it's like, you know, opening a matrix or something.
And I think it's so interesting, this relevance that's behind the motivation, because a lot of it is developmental. And one of the biggest lies of public education is that developmental level and age are so closely tied together, right? Like, sure, you can expect a 2-year-old to have certain abilities, but you can find just as many non-examples of that average as you can of kids that fall right on that average, you know? So, you know, we have these terms of like, oh, they have speech delays. They have, you know, they walked late, they crawled late, all of these things where, is it late or is it just they're representing the kids that happens at that point for them, right? So when we attach grades by age rather than ability level or developmental level, it creates in so many kids this anxiety of not only, you were talking about if you're motivated and you want to learn this stuff, but even if it just has any relevance, and for some kids, it's just not going to at a certain time. And so instead of kind of sequencing things in a way where, like you say, when a child is of a certain age or has a certain goal, some of these skills are going to be a lot more interesting to them, but we kind of block them off for convenience, or for maybe, the publishing company thinks it's a little easier to sequence it in this way. And then we all just jump to and say, oh, that must be the right time for a kid to learn, cursive or whatever it is.
Yes.
And it's so fascinating how we don't acknowledge, collectively as a society, you don't see people acknowledging how much more problems that causes than anything it solves.
Exactly. And it's, again, something I always do to help parents comprehend this is to turn it back on themselves. Like, do you care? You and I are having this conversation, and not once did I ask you how old you were when you learned how to read.
Right.
And you didn't ask me how old I was when I learned how to read, because it doesn't matter.
Sure. Yeah.
We can have, our life experiences and our passions about this subject is what brought us together. And we're having this conversation. Yeah. And not once do any of those other things matter. Do you know how to drive a car that has a stick shift? I don't know. I don't care.
Right. Right.
It's all of these arbitrary things that we decided, or somebody at some point decided kids should know by. In the long term, it does not matter. And when you look at the research about some of these early interventions, and oh my gosh, my first grader can't read independently, so they must be behind. 3 years later, once they've reached that bell curve of most kids, average age of learning these things,
sure,
the gap is gone. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And so we make such a big deal about it in these earlier years that if we just waited and let them figure it out and trusted them and waited for actual problems to show up when they rarely do, we wouldn't see these big gaps anymore. We wouldn't pay attention to them because they close. They don't matter later. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Age is so arbitrary. And then we completely discount things like temperament or ability level or developmental level or interest and learning style. There are so many other deeper and rich and interesting elements that would be a way more interesting way to group children if we were needing to group them in a public education setting. Yep. And we keep falling back to this hilarious and arbitrary measure. And when you look at it, it's like, okay, so you're basically saying it's more important to pump these kids through than it is for any of them to actually learn something. That's what the system communicates. It's more important and more valuable to our society that we have an efficient way to get everyone through. Sure, we'll give a 1 year, leeway if we need to hold a kid back, but that's all. Yep. But and even that phrase, hold them back, anyway, I could go on for that for days. Yeah. But even then, all it's saying is that's what we value, and individual learning, individual progression, individual value. Well, that has to take a back seat. And so it's, with so many of my teacher friends, I'm still in close communication with so many of them. And it's it's not about the teachers. So many people, you bring this stuff up and it's well, teachers work hard. They're underpaid. They're struggling. Of course they are, because they're in a broken system and I'm trying to fix it. It's like saying, hey, your boat's leaking, but I didn't want to offend you, so I'm just going to watch you sink in it and wave from over here on the shore.
Blame you for it.
Yeah. I might toss a life vest out to you at some point once you're in the water, but I wouldn't want to disturb you now. It's
only if you fail bad enough, though. Only if you fail bad enough.
Right.
Then we'll toss you a life.
Right.
You should be doing, pretty middle of the road, so we'll leave you alone. Yeah. And, something else that I think comes into this conversation a lot, but not in the proper way, is neurodivergent kids or kids with special needs. Yes. And they're usually brought in as well, we can't just let every kid do whatever they want, because these norms and these, arbitrary timelines, they are there because that's how we identify students with special needs.
Right.
When you look at and I talk with so many parents with, the umbrella school that I've opened, who they'll email me and say, well, my child has an IEP. So what are we going to do about that?
Mm-hmm.
When you bring that child home, when the, IEPs and 504 plans are almost, I have sat in on thousands of those meetings, and they are almost always exclusively for the benefit of forcing the child to fit into the confines of the classroom and the school.
Right.
It is not, those are not built. It's just like standardized tests. Those things are not built to bring the child up, to help them in those situations that they have need. It is to make accommodations so that that child can function in this system that we have designed around what we have decided is the norm student. Right. So when that child is removed from that often extremely stressful situation for them, then they can flourish. Just like you said, the child who has that red dot, when you take them away from that, then you can see who they really are and what they're really capable of. And as when you are the parent of a special needs child, your goal for them is not to be like everyone else, to acquire all of that knowledge. Their path might not be go to college and become a lawyer. Their path might be, working a good job that they feel safe and confident in doing. So what does that look like when they are a child? And why does it have to look and feel like failure until they're 18? And then you can help them be successful at something. Like you're not doing neurodivergent children any favors either with this one size fits all path. Right. So that's something that I'm very passionate about as well, obviously.
Oh, it's so well said, because yes, just as you mentioned, the IEP 504, it's all about minimizing that child's disruption to the system. It's not about increasing their engagement. And sure, lip service will be given, labels will be attached. That all sound great and sound like the appropriate approach. But, you get anybody off record or behind closed doors who's involved in any of these systems, and they will be the first to tell you how pathetic and broken and, poorly matched the system is. And most of the people working with neurodivergent children in public education settings are there because they deeply care about these kids and they want to help them. And they see it as like, well, at least they have me and my help, because they also recognize that it's a messed up system. And so again, this isn't an attack on the professionals. It's the system that is built around that. And, it's funny. I don't remember who said it. It may have been you. I remember somewhere somebody was like, every homeschool child has an individualized education plan. Like every homeschool kid has an IEP. And that's the reality of it, is like, if you're worried about, oh, well, my kid, had these accommodations or had these special, supports in school, well, congratulations, you now can add to that 10-fold, 100-fold, because everything now becomes individualized, even down to things as simple yet important as using the bathroom in a way that works for them, eating in a way that works for them, managing their space and their body in a way that works for them. I mean, these seem like such, arbitrary things, but my goodness, these kids who have those needs, it is a big deal. I remember as a 4th and 5th grade teacher, our resource teacher on site started funneling all of her students to my classroom every year. And, everyone kind of noticed, and they're like, well, what's going on? She's like, well, Mr. Michael doesn't make kids ask for permission to go to the bathroom. He lets students decide where they want to sit in the room. He gives them freedom of when they're going to complete a assignment. Like, there are all these things that, being this homeschool geek, we're just like second nature to me. Like, why would I make a kid ask me to go to the bathroom? I don't need to know about it. Like, just put a dot next to your name so I know that's where you went. But go ahead, use it 5 times in the course of the school day. I don't care. You'll be back. I know you will. And so the moment like you take those things away, so much of their stress and anxiety melts away. And so I'd get parents at conferences saying, I don't know what you're doing. My child is so much more excited about coming to school and so much more calm. And I'm like, well, I don't know that it's what I'm doing. I would have to say, if anything, if it involves me, it's what I'm not doing. I'm not placing 13 extra requirements on them in their day and things to stress about and worry about and opportunities for them to stand out as different to their peers. because there's no need to. So yeah, you're spot on with that. And I share that passion because there's so many kids that are just, brilliant in the things that they're passionate about and that they're able to do well, but it's not going to look the same for every kid. You mentioned your school, and I mean, my goodness, what a ride. You go from classroom teaching to then embracing this world of supporting parents to, now you're not just supporting the solution, you've created a huge piece of it. So please share with us a little bit about how that came to be and what's going on with that.
Yeah. So, for many years, I've just been, I write, ironically, as an unschooling advocate, I have written curriculum, but it is, which there's some purists out there that would say that makes me not an unschooler, but unschooling to me means following the child's needs. And so what this curriculum is, it's very, very, very open-ended. There's not like, day one, you do this, and day two, you do this. It's interest driven for the kids. It's just something for those parents who need that help with having some structure that still embraces the kids' interest. That's what this curriculum is for. But anyway, I've been doing that for many, many years. I think this is like my 7th year of having this curriculum available. And I've done, workshops and all of these things supporting parents. But, the truth is, everything that I've created began with a personal need. So the curriculum that I started writing 7 years ago was because my oldest child was 3 or 4 years old. I felt like I needed a little bit of that structure. So I started writing down the things that I was doing with him. So most recently, we actually lived I live in Pennsylvania now. We were living in Oregon. In Oregon, it's very easy to homeschool and meet regulations. There's no, you tell the school district that you're homeschooling and they leave you alone. Nobody asks questions. You don't have to turn anything in. Very, very easy. Then we moved back to Pennsylvania last year. And all of a sudden, I'm not trusted anymore, right? You have to, you have to tell them what you're doing, write a list of objectives, meet with an evaluator, an arbitrary evaluator every year, show them a portfolio, take standardized tests. And I just wasn't. I was like, nope. We have to find a better way because I'm not going to do all of that. All of this work that I've done is exactly proving my child's learning to some arbitrary system. So I have always had a dream way down the line, like maybe when the kids are older, of running my own school that was supportive of homeschoolers, that allowed them to live in that freedom of teaching their children the way that they wanted, the way that worked best for their kids, while also meeting those regulations without having to subject their kids to the standardized tests and evaluations. And so when we moved here and I saw all these regulations, I called my business manager and I was like, okay, we got to move the dream up about like 15 years here because I need this now.
It needs to exist now.
It needs to exist for me. So that's where Bridge Academy is our new private umbrella school. And that's exactly what it is. We are an independent private school. So when children enroll with us, or when parents enroll their children, they are officially and legally private school students. They meet the compulsory attendance laws. We keep records for them. We help the parents create transcripts out of what their children are doing. So at the end of the year, we meet with parents, we talk about, okay, I don't want to see your portfolio of this fake stuff that the kids did just to prove it to me. I genuinely want to hear, what did you love? What did you do? Where did you go? What were they interested in? And then we'll take that information and we will turn it into a transcript so that those records do exist if they want to take them to a college, if they want to transfer to another school, if they need to, show them to the state, whatever. And it has been, we opened enrollment for next year on May 1st. It's now May 20th. We have over 200 students enrolled from all over the world.
Wow.
And it's very, very, very exciting to see that, being able to create that out of a need for myself, but then be able to share that with so many other families. I've had multiple calls of parents literally in tears, just thanking me for this freedom, because it's that for some parents who live in those states where it's so rigid, it's so hard when you have this passion, when you've fully leaned into trusting your children and letting them guide how they live their lives, how they learn what they learn, and then also feeling that pull of, well, now I have to prove something to someone else.
Right.
It's exhausting, so that's Bridge Academy. That's our newest venture here at Your Natural Learner.
And I love the approach you're taking. When I tuned into you had a webinar about it a few weeks ago, and I just, I was shouting to my wife in the other room. I was like, they've did it. They've done it. Like they figured it out, because it's that getting rid of the portfolio piece that is so powerful. Because, we're from the Central Coast of California, and we just moved to Arkansas recently. But in California, they had, in the county that we were in, they had this charter school that was very popular, and it was to support homeschooling. And kind of the draw of it was that you could unlock state funding to then funnel to approved vendors. So they had vendors who would teach lessons or have classes or things like that. And so a lot of parents, homeschooling families that were interested in the county would sign up, because they wanted access to those lessons, which of course, hundreds of dollars to spend. And it was great. However, a big piece of it was they had credentialed teachers that they would hire to meet with you weekly, to monitor your students' progress, to help you plan curriculum. I mean, it was very much this.
It's a trap.
Yeah, it's a total trap. And so many families would be like, oh, we do, blah, blah, blah. And I would just say, okay, do you consider that homeschooling? Like,
right.
Or do you consider that school at home? Because those are two different things. That's not the same. And so I love your approach of, just like you said, what are you doing? What are you loving? And then we'll take care of the nitty gritty of documenting that in a way that, meets requirements.
Yep.
And I think far too many parents are caught in that, fearful position of, well, I really want to homeschool. I know it would be good for my kids, but I just don't have the time to, plan all that out and create all that structure. Or especially if you're in a state where there's those requirements, I'm nervous. I don't want to get in trouble with the state for not meeting requirements, which, I could go on for a while about how that's not really a legitimate fear anyway, because the ability of the state to take away your kids and, so many fears are dreamt up in our minds, and the reality of any actual danger is so minimal. But anyway, and so I've had parents who said, even when we got to Arkansas, I was talking to a guy and he's like, so what are you doing? And I explained to him a little about what I'm doing, which my focus is on educating parents on all of the stuff that you and I study, like the pedagogy, because the idea is the more informed you are, the more confident you can be in giving your child that freedom. That doing this is valuable in X, Y, and Z. You're not just feeling like you're taking shots in the dark. And so, I explained to him what I'm doing and, creating my courses and everything. And he's like, okay, but I'm lazy. Like, I love what you're doing, but I don't want to have to learn stuff. I just want to be able to know that my kid's not going to public school, but also know that they're going to good school. So can you just open a school here in Northwest Arkansas and I can send my kid to you? And I laughed, but when I saw what you're doing, it really, like, those dots connected, because I thought and I don't mean to call unschooling parents lazy or anything like that, but I'm saying that was the piece I think for a lot of families who have not yet embraced is I feel overwhelmed, and I'm assuming there's more to it than there is. And so when they have you there, and I know you also have support and you have that structure so that if they do have questions, they can come and interact. But knowing that there's that structure to grab a hold of, I think gives them that initial confidence. And then it's through the process of interacting with the other families, of seeing how flexible the curriculum is, of living it, that they can kind of come to the realization of like, well, what do you know? I'm an unschooler. I didn't even realize it,
Exactly.
I guess
it's
I
like
was more capable than I thought.
Big circle. They have to, this whole journey of
right.
Fear and overwhelm and peer pressure and what are other people going to think about me, and all of this they have to process to come back around to, oh, this is what I've been doing all along.
Yeah. And isn't it funny how, what you just described sounds so much like middle school and high school for a lot of people,
right.
It's like the fear of judgment and what are people going to think of me and how am I going to be judged and am I behind, am I ahead? Like, we've internalized so much of that in society, and then it runs that risk of continuing. So I love that
Yes.
you're breaking that cycle. So for those who are interested in Bridge Academy, and also just interested in connecting with you in general, because I mean, you're just a wealth of the thing that I love about you, and I will gladly proclaim it, is that you're not only knowledgeable, but you're really unapologetic and straightforward about it. And so like your Instagram posts are just a breath of fresh air because you just call it like it is, and you challenge so many assumptions, but in really, a very easy to understand way. And so it's not just like, well, of course it's this way and you're an idiot if you don't agree with me, but it's also unapologetic. So you're not like, well, for those who are willing to you're like, this is how it is, people. Like, assessment doesn't have intrinsic value for the child unless you create assessment that's based around child needs, full stop. Like, it's so refreshing. So for those who are interested, I know you're active on Twitter, Instagram, like let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me. Your Natural Learner is my business, so you can find me pretty much everywhere. Instagram. It's too long for Twitter, but if you search for me, you'll find it. I've been waiting for Twitter to expand the handle more than 12 characters. But anyway, if you search, you'll find me there. Yournaturallearner.com, and that's me on Facebook and Instagram. But for Bridge Academy, if you go to bridgeacademy.us, you'll find out all of the information about that. But you can find it through my regular channels as well.
Great. And I'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes as well, because I know people listening are going to, it's going to perk their ears and realize, oh, maybe that is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any last words of wisdom or kind of bits of knowledge or things to consider for, think of the parent who is considering homeschooling. Maybe they're already homeschooling, but they're considering unschooling. They want to move toward unschooling, but they're just, they still have that kind of question mark of, is it right for me? How do I know if it's right for me? What would your advice be to them of the best next step to take?
Yeah. So I'll share what I always share with people who have any kind of fear popping up about your child, whether it's fear of how things are working right now or how things will go for the future. Anytime fear around your child's learning comes up, give yourself permission to put the fear away for 24 hours and watch your child. Just watch them. They will show you all of the amazing things that they understand, that they are capable of doing, the type of person that they are. When you put the fear of academics away, you really get to see, how your child communicates with others, how they're patient with, an aging pet, how they help themselves, how they show up in the world, the things that light them up, the things they're really good at. And when you can do that, it helps to calm whatever fear might be there about learning, because you get to see the true innate capability of your child, and it really helps you to trust them. So that's always my first piece of advice.
And really, the child is where the focus always should have been. And just as we talked about earlier, that's the missing piece in so many traditional educational settings. We have politicians making decisions based off of political expediency and funding. We have publishing companies making decisions based off of their profit margin. We have unions making decisions based off of creating the best case scenario for their union members. We have local governments making decisions based off of budget allocation and available resources. And, the list goes on and on and on. And in too many situations, the child is not, number one, not present at the table to even voice their needs themselves, but also is not observed or considered in any direct way. And so we see time and time again these decisions made, and it looks good on paper, or maybe it doesn't even look that great, but it's functional. And then as soon as the rubber meets the road and we see how it impacts the child, it fails their needs. And that is really what is so beautiful about choosing the path of homeschooling, and especially unschooling and child-led learning, because ultimately we will be accountable to them for how we help them learn and how we help them learn about themselves. And when my kids are grown, they'll have plenty to, razz me about of, Dad, why'd you do this? Or Dad, you're so embarrassing in this way. Or, those things. But I feel so much more confident in their satisfaction in what they're able to do day to day and how they spend their time than I was when they were in public school and really struggling and stressed and, sitting, we had distance learning going when the year that we started homeschooling. And so they were sitting in front of a Chromebook, just bored out of their minds for 4 hours. I mean, the alternatives are not meant to meet their needs. So thank you for that reminder and for bringing that focus. And thank you so much for all of your amazing work and what you've created so far to support parents. I think that, this is just the beginning for the reach that Bridge Academy will have. And I look forward to seeing what you inspire others to do. Even myself, I saw it and I was like, okay, new goal in the next few years, do that. Like, you paving that way helps alert a lot of other people to say, hey, this is another way that school can look. And anyone who says, well, the privatization of school is a threat and it's just going to create disparities and et cetera, et cetera. Well, not if we all get behind what works, right? Competition shouldn't be scary if what you're offering is quality. It should only be scary if what you're offering was only valuable because you had a hold on the market. So thank you
I always say my ultimate goal is to not be needed. So
right. Yeah, everyone else can improve to the degree where they don't need me. That would be fantastic. But
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the show and thank you for your time and for everything you're doing. And I love that you took what could have been, a comfortable career and a comfortable existence for you and turned it on its head and probably created a lot more demand and probably a lot more stress in your life, depending on the time. But in exchange for immeasurable benefits for so many kids and families. And that will go on in perpetuity for generations. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for bringing that to other people's attention. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
That was Leah McDermott, homeschool mom, unschooling advocate, credentialed educator, curriculum developer, parent coach, small business owner, and lifelong natural learner. If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to give our podcast a positive rating and review to grow our audience. And be sure to share it with the other parents and educators in your life. For information on how you can become a more impactful educator, head over to homeschooledvantage.com and check out our free homeschool planning resources, or consider becoming a member to unlock your advantage through our fully digital, self-guided parent education courses. Until next time, you can join the conversation on Instagram and Twitter by following me at Todd K. Michael, following our Facebook page and YouTube channel, Homeschool Advantage, or following us on TikTok at homeschool_advantage. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody. And if it wasn't for all of you.